Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. 3 months to the day since Lewis Hamilton's joining of Ferrari, an equally seismic announcement here in the Formula 1 world. Adrian Newey, the most successful designer in the history of the sport, will be leaving Red Bull on their Formula 1 side with immediate effect. This means that after the 12-month leave period, he will be available to join another team in time for the 2026 regulations. What team might that well be? Well, Fred Vasseur has reportedly delayed his move to Miami for this upcoming weekend's Grand Prix to meet with Newey in London and potentially finalise a deal. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. What a day in Formula 1 history. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Speaking of Ferrari, this is going to be their livery. It's funny, right, with Ferrari. They teased this blue livery for this upcoming weekend's Miami Grand Prix. And it's like, well, it's blue, but it's basically still red. I mean, did we really think for a second that Ferrari were going to deliver a livery that wasn't basically red? I will say this rear wing with no Ferrari anymore on HP is, yeah, kind of unfortunately ugly. But this is what their livery is going to look like. It's not the best thing Ferrari have produced, but look, if it's fast, Adrian Newey, I imagine, isn't especially going to care. So this is how things developed late last night. The BBC were reporting that Adrian Newey's lawyers were securing an early exit to his term, and therefore he will be free to start work from next year. This was the big debate. I think we all knew that Newey was departing Red Bull. Still, until you see it, it's kind of difficult to believe it, in the same way that on that day that Hamilton left Mercedes to join Ferrari, I was still, even until it was official, I was like, am I really sure I want to report on this, just because everyone's saying it, but it still feels like it can't possibly be real. And Newey has been part of Red Bull for 19 years. Him departing says so much about the state internally at Red Bull. We'll certainly get onto that in a second, because Jos Verstappen was very clear that this heavily destabilizes the team, and what that means for the future Max Verstappen. That is the next question. You know, is this the beginning of the end of the Red Bull dominance? Certainly feels like it, and maybe it's been coming now for quite some time. But last night the discussion was from the BBC that probably Ferrari are the hot favourites to sign him, and he will negotiate an exit where he can work for the 2026 regs, which firstly to me says there's no way he retires, at least in my book. Maybe he does, but like, why would he negotiate and ask his lawyers to heavily negotiate an early exit from his deal if he's just going to call it a day and retire? Unless it's that bad internally at Red Bull that he simply cannot stand it anymore, then surely you would think that the early exit implies that, well, he kind of wants to work somewhere on the 2026 regulations, because having this is now going to be possible. So it was officially confirmed today by Red Bull themselves. The team announces that Chief Technical Officer Adrian Newey will leave the Red Bull Technology Group in the first quarter of 2025. And that, of course, was raising questions, because hang on a second, 1 year gardening leave period, he can't work elsewhere, leaving first quarter 2025, that doesn't necessarily add up to being able to join somewhere else straight away. But we're going to clarify that in a second. The engineering Supremo will step back from Formula 1 design duties to focus on the final development and delivery of Red Bull's first hypercar, the hugely anticipated, as they say, RB17. He'll remain involved in and committed to the exciting project until its completion, but on the Formula 1 side, of course, that is no longer the case. He has been instrumental for us in achieving a remarkable 7 drivers and 6 constructors titles, totaling 118 victories, 100 poles during his time in the organisation. I also wanted to share what he had to say on this. I'm not really interested in what Horner has to say, although we'll discuss that in a second. Newey, though, says, ever since I was a young boy and wanted to be a designer of fast cars, my dream was to be an engineer in Formula 1. I've been lucky enough to make that a reality. So talks about being part of Red Bull Racing, how much of a pleasure it's been, but this is the interesting part to me. However, I feel now is an opportune moment to hand that baton over to others and seek new challenges for myself. So does that sound like a man that's going to kick his feet up and retire? Not to me. My feeling is that he's going to do something after he retires. Whether that's working in Formula 1 still, that is a matter for debate, but I'm sure that Ferrari, Aston, Mercedes, potentially McLaren will do anything it takes to make Newey happy to work in the project. And Ferrari, for example, and even Aston Martin maybe on the Valkyrie, but, you know, Ferrari could offer him the chance to work on their hypercar, you know, win Le Mans as well at the same time, who knows, and then also, of course, work on the Formula 1 project, even if he's not massively thrilled by the 2026 regulations, which it doesn't sound like he is. Obviously, everyone wants Adrian Newey on their team. His success rate on teams that he's worked for in championships is nigh on 50%, which is ludicrous if you think about it, over his time in Williams, McLaren, and then into Red Bull. And honestly, if you look at his history as well, you'll see a general trend of when there is a major regulation change, the team that he tends to be at tend to do rather well. Williams 1998, for example, with the Mika Hakkinen victories to follow, even 2009 for Red Bull when there were major changes, and sure, they didn't win out of the gates. Brawn won the first year, but after that they won 4 straight. Of course, 2014, if their engine was better, they would have been more competitive during those cycles, and then, you know, I don't need to say anything on 2022, and for the last few years, of course. So Christian Horner is, in many ways, the architect of this downfall. I think it was relatively clear at the start of February, when all the drama was happening, that heads would roll at some point. There would be implications of this from the back end, and sure, it quietened down for a bit, but I was convinced that eventually something was going to be happening as a result, and the feeling is that Newey does not want to work with Horner anymore, and there are probably other internal reasons why Newey wants to leave. There are even reports today, quite considerable ones from notable names, that Newey's not so happy with the technical relationships that he maybe had with his other staff, let's say, at the top of Red Bull. The feeling that Horner was trying to sideline Newey to the RB17 stuff, not giving him the credit that he deserved for the success maybe over the last couple of years. And of course, Horner gives his statement on superstar designer, true legend, and all this stuff. And sure, they were friends, maybe they still are friends in some way, but from a business side, it ain't working anymore. So this is not a graphic that I expected to see. And we've talked about these rumors on the channel for months. It's not been a brand new thing to talk about Newey leaving Red Bull, but when it actually happens, this hits different, right? And it hits the same way as this graphic did a few months ago when Hamilton was joining Ferrari. Equally unbelievable at the time, but when this happened, as even Hamilton himself said in an interview a month or so ago, well, my joining of Ferrari means that anything is possible, and he made that statement in regard to somebody saying, how about Newey joining Ferrari as well? And, well, potentially the rest there was going to be history. So this is a seismic move in the Formula 1 landscape. Hamilton joining Ferrari, Max Verstappen joining Mercedes or whatever, these things are equal in magnitude to a guy like Adrian Newey leaving Red Bull. That's how important this is for the future of the sport and for the future of Red Bull themselves. Now, it's important enough for the future of Red Bull, but if somebody else gets him, then it becomes doubly important, right? Because, you lose the genius of Newey, but somebody else gets him as well, especially given it's still going to be ground effect from 2026 and beyond. So then the question was, sure, he's leaving early 2025. What does that mean? Can he work a year after that? Because the feeling was, well, leaving early 2025, as in this time next year, 1 year guarding leave period, so he can only join a new team in 2026, which means he can only work on the car for 2027. That doesn't sound ideal, but as Joe Soward says, he will be available this time next year. So people are like, okay, how does that exactly work? And then it was said in the article here on the BBC that Jordan and Newey, so Eddie Jordan, obviously former team boss, and actually Newey's manager, which I didn't know about, maybe I'm behind the times, but apparently Eddie Jordan is Newey's manager, which he is, and Jordan has a few words to say on this actually in a second, which I thought were rather insightful if you know anything on Eddie Jordan's character. But basically Andrew Benson says, they've pulled off a major coup in extricating the designer from a contract that ran to the end of 2025 and included a 12-month non-compete clause, which should have meant that he was not available to any other team until 2027 at the earliest. That is not the case. AMUS are reporting this, and The Athletic are reporting this, that effectively he leaves the Formula 1 project with immediate effect. So Newey's out of there, not working on the Formula 1 side at all anymore. He will work on the RB17 hypercar project until its conclusion, then he will leave in next spring. So his guarding leave from the Formula 1 team begins today, right? So his 1 year leave pretty much begins literally 1st of May potentially, and he will be available 1st of May next year to join any other team that he likes, even though he will only leave Red Bull shortly before that. So, if he wants to go on his travels and sail around the world, maybe he does that now while designing the RB17 from, the comfort of his laptop or something, or potentially he does that for a short period before joining another team. But clearly there is interest elsewhere. But as has been described, Newey is a free agent next spring. And I believe what's happened here, right, is that the lawyers in question have gone to Red Bull and said, look, we're not happy with this. Newey will depart, but Newey will bring your RB17 hypercar project to a conclusion. And in exchange, you will allow him to walk for free when he departs the team. So no guarding leave. This is said by Eric van Haren at the Telegraph in the Netherlands. This is said by The Athletic. This is said by MUS. So this is a done deal. Newey will be able to go where he wants this time next year, which is a massive deal. That's so important for any car, any team that wants to design a great car for 2026, because having Newey working on your project for 8 months, 9 months, or whatever, before the car is launched, that is, well, potentially a recipe for success. We've seen it in the past. We may well see it again in the future, especially if what Newey has kind of talked about, or at least would have been rumoured, on Newey's frustrations with the internal team dynamics, the feeling that he was being sidelined and not given the credit for the last couple of years. Because if Newey, and Newey's a competitive guy, I think Frank Williams said that Newey's like the most competitive guy he knows. If Newey isn't happy about the way that he was treated, about the way that potentially he feels like his contributions were somewhat downplayed, which has probably been the case by Red Bull for the last couple of years at least, Newey seems to feel that way. The perfect way to prove that he is the man would be to go to, especially a team like Ferrari, and design a championship-winning car, would it not? So if Newey is as competitive as people believe that he is, he will join another team that could potentially knock Red Bull off their perch and end the dominance. I mean, you know, what a way for Newey and for presumably Hamilton to end their careers if they were to go to Ferrari and, you know, design a championship when they can't win the championship. Like, that's got, you know, fairy tale stuff written all over it. So he will still attend some Grand Prix with Red Bull, but apparently mainly for the RB17 promotion stuff, and he's no longer going to be part of their day-to-day F1 operations. Maybe he still goes onto the grid with his pen and paper and starts taking down notes of the other team's cars, and that's what we've got to talk about next. What does this mean for Red Bull? He's won 25 Drivers' and Constructors' Championships over the year. These are just those cars, you know, the Williams obviously in the 90s, then into the McLaren days in 98 to 99, then the Red Bull 2010, 11, 13, and then of course since 2021 they've won at least one championship every single year with cars designed by him. And this is what Ralf Schumacher says: if Horner stays, the team will sink into mediocrity. And that of course implies this is not the last we're going to see of changes at Red Bull. It's a seismic blow, as Andrew Benson describes here in his article, to Red Bull. Despite their domination of the sport, it raises questions on Verstappen. The Dutchman is known to have been unsettled by the fallout from the Horner saga and has repeatedly ducked the question when asked to give his team boss the full backing. Of course, Verstappen's deal is there, but I feel like another team, let's say Mercedes, has to feel more confident than ever that they can steal Verstappen away. This was the final quote that I wanted to mention. The Horner controversy may yet have further ramifications within Red Bull. Insiders say other senior figures in the team are also considering leaving as a consequence of it. So it's more than likely not just Newey. We probably will see other departures in due course. If there are, like, you know, other senior figures, probably one of them is going to feel similarly and bite the bullet, especially when Newey departs, and now that's official. It's like, well, bloody hell, like Newey's gone. Seems to me that maybe it is the time to step away for various reasons, in the same way that, you know, Mercedes, they lost so many individuals to teams like Red Bull during their period of dominance. When the regs changed, bang, they fall off, right? And maybe the same thing is going to happen for Red Bull come 2026. Even though Newey isn't now designing next year's car, I'm sure it's still going to be great in the hands of Wache and Balbo and Waterhouse and those excellent technical team that they still have at Red Bull. And I'm sure that Red Bull can do a stellar job next season. For 2026, though, not having Newey is, you know, genius ability to see the regulations, see the loopholes, see the ideas that other people miss and the important factors that other people miss. Like, that's what Newey's been famous for doing in his career, and that's not an advantage Red Bull will have in 2026. There was also this quote. I wonder who you guys think may have said this, but an anonymous team principal said the following. Here it is, actually. The team principal, who did not want to be identified: it would be an unmitigated disaster for Red Bull if Newey was let go early to join a competitor. Christian would look like a complete fool, just as Whitmarsh did at McLaren when he handed Brawn the keys to Mercedes, which kick-started their years of dominance in F1. So who might have said this? Obviously, if it's roasting Horner, you'd think it's probably Toto Wolff, but the way that he describes it as Mercedes, I don't know, he calls him Adrian rather than Newey. It might, you know, represent some degree of personal relationship. I don't know. You can potentially speculate on which TP said this, but Christian would look like a complete fool, which is effectively, I think, what we are seeing today. And that's why Jos Verstappen, he's wading into it as well. Jos, of course, Max's father, not an especially happy man with the Horner situation. And yeah, Jos said the following: it's important for internal peace. The key figures remain on board. That is now not the case. This was actually the full quote here. The team is in danger of collapsing. I was already afraid of that earlier in the year. It is important for internal peace. The key figures remain on board. This is no longer the case. Newey is leaving, and earlier this year it looked like Helmut was to be fired. That is not the case, but it's not good for the future. The article also goes on to say that in the meantime, Mercedes are preparing to pay Max $160 million a year to get him into their team, give him the ambassadorship stuff. So this has now been reported so widely that Mercedes are trying everything to get Max. it might still be a long shot, but if there was a time, now obviously is the time, and even the article speculates about, well, if Max were to leave, then next year we could have a Sainz, because I think Sainz would go there, certainly if Max was to go, Perez in a Red Bull, and then Hamilton, Leclerc in a Ferrari, which would be an absolute banger, I've got to say, on paper. The big question, though, that remains on this, not only in terms of what's going to happen next to Red Bull, but it's also where does he go next, right? Does Newey retire, or does he go for another option? This is what Eddie Jordan, Newey's manager, has to say. Remember that under Red Bull, he's been under constant pressure, so if he's going to take time out and just cruise for a while, everyone would understand that. That's probably more likely to see, rather than diving into any other possible employment career. Things have slightly changed. He probably should and would look at, think about a change of life. So this is what Jordan has to say. Now, you've got to look at this from two angles. First of all, Eddie Jordan is his manager. So if you're trying to negotiate a contract with a certain team, saying, well, Newey isn't really so keen to do this. He's more interested in just going and enjoying himself on his yacht for the next couple of years. That's the type of thing that makes Ferrari say, okay, let's add another zero to the contract, and therefore Eddie Jordan pockets another, 20% or whatever that addition might be. So there is that, and Eddie Jordan is smart enough to know this, I imagine. And also, when you hear Eddie Jordan speak on things, he often kind of likes to stir the pot. So I think many people are reading this as Eddie Jordan might well be on board with Newey joining another team and believes that is the most likely, but what he says is not necessarily matching the reality. So of all the options, Ferrari now seem by far the most likely. We saw yesterday that Newey supposedly doesn't think McLaren are really in position to challenge in the near future, doesn't especially think Toto Wolff is a great team principal, and thinks Mercedes are, just too far away from competing. Doesn't mind the Aston Martin offer, but the possibility of working under Lawrence Stroll doesn't really appeal to him, so that leaves Ferrari as the most likely option as it stands. And today, the Gazzetta are reporting that Newey has been in London meeting Fred Vasseur. So what their article said, and Andrew Benson kind of reported on this report and tweeted it, which makes me think that maybe he doesn't have any information to this effect, but he at least feels like it may be credible, because often if there's something that's really out there, journalists like Benson will probably not even mention it, but he must think this is at least plausible or has some information to the effect. But the article basically says Fred Vasseur was due to fly, or was potentially going to fly with the team today to Miami for the Grand Prix, but he's not. He's actually in London today meeting with Newey to potentially finalise some sort of deal. And as I said, Benson mentioned that in his article, that Gazzetta have reported Newey has met with Vasseur in London to discuss a potential deal. So it's not necessarily a done deal yet. The feeling is that talks are underway. Vasseur is now making the move, right? I mean, man, if this guy manages to pull off the Hamilton-Newey heist that we all talked about, to be fair, when Hamilton joined, it was like, damn, imagine they got Newey, like that'd be crazy. And it's closer to happening than it ever has been. Ferrari have tried to get Newey's signature a couple of times over the last couple of decades, and it's never happened. And in the same way with Hamilton, in a way, like not really the last couple of decades precisely, but there's been talks that Mercedes and Ferrari, or at least Hamilton and Ferrari, were in conversation over the last 5 years a few times, and it never quite worked out, and like Hamilton was always like, no, it doesn't make sense, but then all of a sudden something clicked and it made sense, and maybe it's going to be the same case here with Newey as well. So the belief is that Ferrari is the only team that Newey is seriously considering right now, and a deal is said to be close. The feeling is, as Kamal Singhal says, this might take some time. Newey doesn't have to rush this decision either. He has another year working at Red Bull, but not on their Formula 1 stuff, and he's got plenty of time because he's a free agent next year, next spring. So there isn't necessarily a hurry. The agreement has seemingly not been signed, but Kamal says, yeah, the contact with Vasseur is true. Like, this is happening. It's just a question of whether Newey agrees, and more than likely he will wait a little while longer to determine his decision. So yeah, what a day in the Formula 1 landscape. Unbelievable scenes. Just one final funny thing to mention here today. Günther Steiner is suing Haas. Not the biggest news of the day, even though it would be quite a big news, to be fair, if this Newey stuff hadn't happened. But he reckons that in 21 and 23, he had unpaid commissions during those seasons, and therefore he wants those paid back. And also, in merchandise and materials, promotional materials, he believes that Haas were using his likeness to, of course, for merchandise and promotional monetary gain without actually having the rights to do so based on a signature or potential contract relationship. So yeah, Steiner's suing Haas. They've not had the best time over the last couple of months, have they? Steiner and Haas. Obviously he was fired, and they're doing quite well, Haas, now under Ai Komatsu, although maybe Steiner thinks that could be his own doing, shall we say. The other thing that I was going to mention, of course, is today is the 30-year anniversary of the passing of Ayrton Senna, and there was actually talk that the Newey announcement would be delayed just because, of course, Senna passed away in a 1994 Newey designed Williams. So the discussion was maybe they'll push the Newey announcement for, another day or announce it Thursday or something. But of course, that is not how it's worked out today. So yeah, 1st of May, a big day in the sport of Formula One generally as a result, but even more so on this, I can't really describe it any other way than seismic, to be perfectly honest. So very much to Twitter your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.